And happy birthday, Jimmy Chen. So we've got the staff here to address the Accessible Cities chapter. We felt that going through the amendments that we have remaining on the table, that we thought we'd start the day with something interesting and challenging, and something that there is, I think, a considerable amount of concern about, in the sense that it is part of the Central City Recovery Plan, but was developed in a way that was quite separate from that particular, the rest of the plan. And in fact, I think it was one of the very early briefings that we had from the Minister just as we came into office, and I think I went out and joined him at a press conference that I was part of, that I hadn't quite been expecting, but there you go. So, so if you would like to, because we have an amendment in front of us that proposes to take out phases 2 and 3 altogether, we would like to have a briefing from staff just giving us an overview, and then perhaps a focus on what phases 2 and 3 mean, because there are different components to the phases, some of which will attract funding from NZTA, others of which that won't. But also there are connections with our cycleways, and trying to get some modal change within the central city. If we don't, within the city as a whole, if we don't look at the central city as tying into that, that will raise other issues as well. So it's a challenging issue. So let's have a little bit of an educative part of the session, and then we'll look at the amendment and see whether that's the amendment that people want to proceed with, or whether they want to make some adjustments to it. So if I hand over to you, Mike, and the team.
Thanks, Leanne. So you'll just get a bit of a tag team exercise between myself, Richard and Tim on this. And we're happy to explore down different things. We've got a few, I suppose, a few graphics, but if I just set the context, and then Richard and Tim will take you through some of the details of where we've got to, and in the light of some of the discussions that's been happening with Council, how we think we can offer back a program which keeps us going without perhaps committing us to the sort of the full dollars that were initially associated with phases 2 and 3, because it would be easy to go back to, from a staff point of view, back to the full noise, but we recognise that that's probably not going to be something that we can financially afford. So, as Leanne has said, and I can well remember yes, it was that sort of wet Thursday afternoon where I think you'd just been in office, the Minister suddenly turned up, wanted to make an announcement, you went outside and stood next to him, and I think you came back saying, what have I just announced? But I think the key thing is that an accessible city is a critical part of actually delivering the recovery of the central city, and I think we need to think about it in that context. It's not simply, it's certainly not simply a series of roading projects. It's a hell of a lot more than roading in the first order, and that it actually also covers things such as the concept of the slow streets, pedestrianisation, improving the look and feel of the public realm. And I think I heard, it might have been Leanne or perhaps Vicky yesterday, talking about the fact that we've often maintained that the most important thing that actually brings life back into the city is actually creating a strong public realm that actually is conducive to people investing back into property and actually joining up the dots between some of the bigger projects. So AAC is about joining all those dots together. So it starts at a traffic level in terms of slowing the centre down. It starts to, in its very early iterations when the council was looking at it, it looked at very much removing the one-way systems, but that didn't emerge through the government model in its entirety. But it's also about creating an integrated network that basically supports life in the central city, focuses on connecting some of our cycleway networks into the central city, supports strong bus connections back into the central city, and basically is about lifting that whole public realm space back to or I suppose back to and beyond where we were to create a high quality public realm. So in terms of we're thinking about regeneration of the central city, it's a key integral part of that. So that's probably a bit of context. So I suppose what we will just quickly do is basically get Richard to explain what's been happening with the first phase and what we see are the important phases or the important elements of the next phases to move into.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, the graphic that you have in front of you now simply shows the first phase program of works which Council approved in May last year, and that's the $72 million, which was part funded by Council, 27 million, 27 by Sarah or the Crown, and a further 18 million from NZTA. So from our perspective, we certainly got a reasonable amount of bang for our buck for that $72 million. And what that first phase program of work sought to do was to really prioritise projects that sought to support the first phase anchor projects. So the bus interchange, as you remember this time last year, we discussed about reprioritising projects so that we could get the traffic going along Chewham Street so the buses could actually access the interchange. The upgrade to and around Litchfield Street and Colombo supports the retail precinct as well. And we've just finished consultation on what we call the Hospital Corner works, Durham Street, Cambridge Terrace and Manchester Street, and the proposal was to bring the results of that consultation back to you and seeking to obtain approval for those works in a couple of months' time. And that's really the first phase set of projects. So, as Mike mentioned, an accessible city is really a program of works, and one of the key things that it seeks to do is support quite a significant increase in the number of people using public and active modes of transport. So effectively a threefold increase in people walking, cycling and taking public transport. And I guess the risk of not doing the further phases, phases 2, 3, 4 and 5, is that mode shift which underpins it will not be achieved. So that's probably the first risk of not doing the further phases or of delaying them into the future. The second risk is the stated intention of the recovery plan is obviously this vibrant and successful central city, and the inaccessible city is designed so that it supports the early benefits of Crown investment in the anchor projects as well as the public investment or private investment into developments that we see going along Durham and Cambridge Terrace and other parts of the central city as well. So it's quite fundamental to those that if we're encouraging the private sector to throw tens or hundreds of millions of dollars into redeveloping the central city, that the public realm, particularly the streetscape outside those developments, doesn't look like it does now, which in some cases is pretty poor. As Mike also alluded to, the major cycleway program, there's very limited funding for that past the 4 Avs. So there's a couple of things that it does fund within the 4 Avs, but very limited amount. So if Council does decide to continue with the major cycleways through the LTP, but not an accessible city, then we'll have the problem of not having linkages between the major cycleway program outside the central city and what we're proposing within the central city. The other one is PT, or public transport. Obviously Council has a major piece of work along Rickham Road, which is about both bus priority and a bus interchange. And again, it's fundamental that that at the moment would stop at the Rickett and Deans Ave intersection. Now, if we don't continue some form of bus priority beyond that and into Rickett and Ave, again, you lose the benefits of those projects which sit outside the central city. So in a bit of a nutshell, that's the key risks that we see from not funding phases 2, 3 and 4 of an accessible city. And the other thing is that, independent of the blueprint, obviously development has occurred in some areas, and Victoria Street's a good example of that, where large portions of Victoria Street are pretty much developed. It's pretty high quality, but the streetscape environment is quite poor still. So it's our recommendation that certainly that street is subject to a renewal, and that would support that private sector investment. So perhaps just moving on from the that first schematic there, and that speaks to the further phases of an accessible city and what we're seeking to achieve from that, and the anticipated funding from other stakeholders. So phase 2 is all about mode choice, transport efficiency and wayfinding. It's about the public realm, and it's really about supporting that pedestrian slow core, which is set at 30 kilometres an hour. And again, the integration of that with the cycleways is quite fundamental, because when the cycleways can get in to the central city through the separated cycleways, once they get to the slow core, they can mix it with pedestrians and private vehicles because everything is slowed down. But to cut to the chase, this is probably the key slide here. And what we have done is, based on the feedback we've received from councillors and consultation with the public last year, is that we've picked what we felt would be the best projects to support what council wants to achieve, and indeed what is set out with an accessible city, and put those to you now. Which, as you can see, we'll just take a moment to go through those, adds up to about $29 million worth of funding. So not the original amount that was in the draft LTP.
Yeah, compared to what?
It was about 75 million was originally in the LTP, I believe.
And the LTP?
Phase 2 of...
phase 2. Yeah.
All of an accessible city, which is, if you took the whole program of works, which we've anticipated would probably take about 20 years to do, the total cost is around, I think, 263 million. Right. Now, obviously, $72 million of that has already been allocated, and some of that's been spent. Phase 2, what we did was basically break that up into what we call the Phase 2T, which is the transport projects, and 2P, which is public realm. That was about $90 million worth of works. Phase 3 was about 36 million, Phase 4 was about 44, and Phase 5 was about 20 million. But we never anticipated that all that work would be done within the next 10 years. It's really a program of work that would take 20 years to do. So, but what we've done is pluck out the key projects which we think would support the slow core, ensure that we have efficient wayfinding within to the central city, and connect to the PT and major cycle route projects that council has outside of the central city. So what I might do now is just hand over to Tim to do a very brief summary, if that's okay, of these projects here and just the benefits of them.
So very briefly, those are the key projects that we see in transport terms would deliver a lot of the key principles of accessible city in a cut down phase 2. The wayfinding project is just as much about direction of travellers into car park buildings, to and from those car park buildings. We'll get a lot of network efficiencies out of people not hunting round streets looking for vacant spaces. That's quite an expensive programme to deliver well, but it would link into the major new car parking buildings. So that's why we're recommending that stays early in the programme. The low-speed core, as Richard's just summarised, is much more than just delivering public realm enhancements in the heart of the central city. The business case for the major cycleways programme across the city expected that accessible city would deliver the bulk of those enhancements within the core of the central city. It is the hub that connects all those routes together, and so it is about the last 500 metres of that journey for a cyclist to their places of employment. And so, as Richard said earlier, this tripling of the number of people catching the bus, cycling, walking in the centre of the town is not a nice to have. It's hardwired into our transport projections for the central city that if we don't achieve that mode shift, we will be looking at congestion with the increased level of development that we're expecting in the central city. So there is a direct relationship between the slow core and the business case and the rollout programme for our major cycleways. A similar issue applies with the St Asaph Street upgrade, is that councillors heard from us last year about the delivery of the Chewham Street separated cycleway going east from the hospital towards CPIT. St Asaph Street delivers the reverse direction, and so that's being built now. The Chewham Street cycleway is going in now. Our recommendation through this would be that as early as possible we deliver the matching facility for cyclists heading safely westbound towards the hospital across the southern part of the central city. Kilmore Street and Salisbury Street two-way conversions, well, they were the remainder of where council wanted us to look at how could we convert all of the one-way pairs back to two-way. It's always been an important issue for council in our understanding, and that's why when we revised that programme, recommended revising that programme to council last May, council asked us to make sure that the conversion of Salisbury and Kilmore Streets remained a priority in the Phase 2 programme. So that's why we're recommending they still sit there within a scoped back Phase 2 programme. Victoria Street upgrade, I think Richard's already explained that. That really is, I suppose, to underpin the third-party investment that's going into important new premises along there. And the Riccarton Road bus priority, that's probably all about the evening peak journey and about buses coming out of town, where we'll whiz them along St Asaph Street, hopefully, through the super stop there. They'll hit Riccarton Ave, and we don't want them held up before they get to the Dean's Riccarton set of signals. And so that would deliver a bus priority lane westbound. It is that evening connection at Riccarton that is important. You've got frequent buses coming out of town, but they will typically be meeting in less frequent services at Riccarton. So that few minutes of missing a connection at Riccarton will be all important to the attractiveness of that evening service out of the city. So again, that's why we're recommending that that be done reasonably.
Could we
early
wait
in the
until
programme.
the presentation's finished,
So
Yanni? Thank you.
that's it, Madam.
Thank you.
So can I just also note, just without wanting to get into the dollar discussion, these are the gross costs that we've estimated. So some of these will achieve potential NZTA subsidy.
Right.
We don't know exactly the level of subsidy. We don't know exactly which bits of them, but there will be. I can see Mr. Gudsall's just woken up the minute I suggested there was some money coming in over there.
Whenever you use that word subsidy from somewhere else, it just brings them alive. Yeah.
The autumn kicks in. So I'll just dampen them down by saying we shouldn't. That's going to obviously be have to be contestable. It's going to have to be proven in every case. But we think it's probably safer to work with the gross dollars at this point for council.
Okay. So in order to have an amendment on the table, is someone wanting to move the amendment that we remove phases 2 and 3 from the LTP? And does anyone want to foreshadow the motion if that fails, that this proposal, revised priority phase 2, comes into the LTP?
I'll foreshadow a motion if that was to fail.
Okay, so you'll foreshadow the motion and you'll move the motion to remove phases 2 and 3.
What I was going to suggest, if we can,
Yep.
now that we've heard from staff and now that we've had commentary on the report that was put overnight, I'd quite like, this is our amendment, this is People's Choice Amendment, I'd quite like to have some time to have some discussion with the team so that we can discuss what approach we'd like to take. I think that would be the most sensible way forward.
Okay, so we'll just have questions at the moment and we won't debate it. We'll have the adjournment before we debate it.
That would be really helpful.
Okay, no, I'm happy to be helpful. You know that I always am. Yanni, Vicky and Glenn.
So I'm just looking at the program that we have that we went out and consulted on, and I take the example of Kilmore Street. We consulted on 13 million. You've now got a figure of 7.4 million. So I can't quite understand why we keep getting different figures, and this program has actually been really difficult to get your head around the funding, and I just want to understand why we've got different figures. I also look at things like Riccarton, and we're proposing to spend 5 million, but you've come back with
0.5.
0.5.
500.
So
500.
it's kind of hard to make decisions when you don't, when you can't quite understand why the numbers keep changing and what the numbers are actually based on.
Because it's probably only a component of it, but perhaps you could run through that.
Yes, certainly. We haven't consulted in detail yet over the details of the Kilmore and Salisbury Street conversions. Certainly the outline cost we had in for Kilmore Street was significantly higher than that. When we were looking at that matter for council last year in terms of rephasing that first phase programme, we did believe at that time that it may be possible to achieve some savings with that scheme. So we achieved the basic two-way conversion, but actually we feel now that this is probably a better reflection of the likely cost of achieving that two-way conversion on Kilmore Street. And certainly we would continue to recommend to council that those two streets be treated together.
Did you take out some of the public realm stuff? You know, I mean, like, I just wondered whether it's what we're seeing now is a more precise estimate of the two-way conversion rather than the whole project, which was more than just the two-way conversion.
Correct, yes, and I think it probably takes account more of some of the repair work that's taken place on some of the streets in the area than some of our earlier estimates perhaps did.
Okay.
So what confidence can we have in these figures, given that, for example, Victoria Street has had almost zero change and is still showing at 7 million? So some you've completely changed, cut in half, and others you've kept entirely the same. And I don't quite understand why that is.
Just one more thing on Kilmore Street. It's our understanding that the town hall repair will mean that that will probably go down to one lane past Kilmore Street over the next couple of years. So I don't think that's something that council should progress probably until perhaps 17, 18 if you are of a mind to approve this. So that's just a point noted. I think what we've tried to do, councillor, is given the funding pressures that council is on, is shave parts of this off and bring back something to you which is more palatable as a whole. So some of the figures have changed a bit. We've reprioritised them, but we've also looked at the projects themselves and gone, is there some savings that you could make? And that's why you'll see some of the figures.
So Victoria Street, which is 3 blocks, $7 million, I think is hugely expensive. It's already had its repairs done. It's got private investment, so I'm not quite sure what the catalyst is. It's a huge investment from the private sector. In fact, you know,
But is that a matter for debate, or is it a question for staff?
It's a question. Why haven't you taken any off the Victoria Street upgrade, and why have you not been able to value engineer that to cut it at least in half, if not further, given it's not extensively damaged? It's got private investment, which has been one of the reasons you've. Well,
it's a completely useless piece of road, actually, at the moment.
Well, yeah,
but that's the engineering solution, which tells people that they should go down to Beeley Avenue. But naturally, your instinct is to turn left into Victoria Street, and people get stuck at the light interchange because the lights have been reconfigured for right-hand turns. And I've kind of got my head around finally why we've got this bottleneck. But it will remain a bottleneck until we address what is an instinctive left turn from Montreal Street.
But why haven't you reduced that budget? Like, why is there still a need to spend $7 million on a road that has had its earthquake repair, it's had the private sector investment, and actually we've got, you know, it just seems weird that you value engineered some of the others.
Tell the Victoria Street group who've been demanding changes to their whole streetscape.
They want safety improvements, I understand that, but I'm talking about the $7 million cost, which seems hugely expensive when you weigh up all our other priorities for the benefits that you're going to get, which half don't exist for this particular area.
What do we get for $7 million?
Through you, Madam Chair. The upgrade of Victoria Street, it is part of the 30k zone, whereas the other streets aren't, and so the level of pedestrian footpath enhancement and streetscape enhancement would be higher there as a consequence of that, because we're expecting higher pedestrian footfall there. As is already the case now. And so that cost for Victoria Street there...
Is that all the way down to Beeley Ave?
Yeah.
Yes,
30k.
From Kilmore down to Beeley.
The unit costs there are
So is Montreal 30k? Is Montreal 30k?
That whole area.
Yes, up to Kilmore.
Elements within the core, but Victoria Street was has been the extension of Victoria Street is itself a 30k limit as of.
So Montreal is, but Madras isn't. It's weird.
Not at the parallel part. So when you instinctively turn left to go down Victoria, that will be 30 k's. Montreal will be 50. So
yes, no.
So that helps.
It'll be 50k for the rest.
Yes. So you don't instinctively turn left because you say I want to go slower. All of a sudden you start saying, well, I can just stay exactly where I am, go up to Bailey Ave and go 50 k's and not go through around pedestrians.
Yeah, but
so that
the
helps
light
with what you're
sequence
saying.
isn't still right because even if you follow the engineered solution, you go left into Bailey Ave, you've got to get into the next lane in 2 stops. So that you can turn right into Papineau Road.
I mean, the whole concern is that, you know, like, totally understand.
Getting into the debate.
Need to do
Sorry.
We're getting into the debate, and I thought we were asking questions of clarification.
Let me go through. Okay, fine.
So what do we get for $7 million?
A similar level of streetscape enhancement to that going in on Colombo Street, Litchfield Street at the moment. Higher grade improvements are being prioritised through the Streets and Spaces Design Guide, which councillors considered a few weeks ago. Yeah. They're being prioritised around enhanced treatments on streets that are likely to get higher levels of commercial activity and pedestrian footfall. That's why the footpath treatments, for instance, on Colombo Street are of a higher grade than the footpath improvements on Manchester Street, for instance, because they're based upon where the businesses are and where people would expect a higher grade of pedestrian.
That's great.
So,
Vicky, it's Vicky's turn now.
Well,
Vicky.
Still haven't had my other questions answered. Like Riccarton Ave, how's that gone from 5 million to $500,000?
It's the only one element of the bus priority. It's just the bit on Hagley Avenue, not Riccarton Avenue, not Riccarton Road. It's got nothing to do with Riccarton Road.
No, the accessible ACC program that we consulted on said it was just that Riccarton road through the AAC only goes through that part anyway.
Riccarton Ave.
Riccarton Ave. Yeah. So it says 5 million. So it's for that part.
This probably would be achieved through primarily traffic management changes. Most of the measures there could be incorporated within the existing carriageway. Yeah. So it's mainly a case of us consulting over traffic changes to achieve a westbound out-of-town bus lane, primarily for the evening peak, that would then link through to the Deans Avenue signals that are part of the Riccarton Road.
So I think what's missing from that is I appreciate you've gone and had a look at this program, but we still don't have the project descriptions as to what the difference is in terms of the scope from what we consulted on, which was going to be funded. So it's very hard to give feedback because I don't know what the impact. I mean, we've heard a little bit.
Yeah, but this is the debate because what we asked staff to do was to analyse the proposal to remove all of phase 2 and 3, which is what they've done. They've come back and they've said, if you want to maintain certain elements, then these are the priority areas for doing that. So, Vicky.
So the bit I'd really like to understand is the bit that's missing, like the bit that's not now there, and the impact of that.
Right.
So the bits that we're not doing, what will we notice?
So the full phase 2 programme would have been about $74 million
no, I understand the
worth
numbers.
Of transport-led and another $16 or $17 million worth of public realm-led, which would have been unlikely to attract NZTA subsidy. The wayfinding figure, for instance, originally in there was circa 7 million. What this programme contains is what we, as Richard's just described, what we believe would be the nucleus of the transport measures that would need to form part of the phase 2
but
programme.
what Vicky's asking is what do we miss out on if we go for this model, what is lost? I mean, we know that we reduce the funding, but what do we lose in terms of the central city?
You simply don't get the full benefit of the program of works, and that's the increase in mode shift that we're predicting. So, you know, what an accessible city is based on was a threefold increase in public and active transport, and these works all underpin that. If you reduce the program to this, you're unlikely to get that increase in mode shift, but we think this is still a good do minimum option that will achieve some of the benefits of what an accessible city wants.
Okay, so for example, if you're taking 16 or 17 million off public realm, what are you not doing? What are we not doing?
Well, there's a whole raft of projects that we'd have to do a comparison for you, but what was in the draft LTP was a whole raft of projects which we're just saying, well, our understanding was that we had to really minimise what those looked like, so we've just pulled a whole lot out. We haven't got those. We could get something to you on those.
Yeah, well, there's going to be a break at morning tea time where various people are going to think about how they might want to construct the debate for this particular subject. So if you actually could do a line-by-line comparison about what was there and what's gone, that would be useful if that could be circulated.
If I could provide some overall context as well. So what we're talking about here is within the draft long-term plan, we had all the phases within the draft, so that was in the capital program. Through the program of, through the submissions and through the capital discussions we had with council, they got pushed out within the reprofiled capital program, so they're from 22 onwards. What this debate is talking about today is pulling some of them back to allow for the bare bones benefits of that accessible city. To give you an idea of what those costs and activities would add up to at a rates percentage term, it's about 1/3% over 4 years. The profiling of how that third would turn out depends on aspects such as whether Kilmore would be delayed for a couple of years and wouldn't necessarily start next year. But you're talking about those projects at a net level, once you've taken an NZTA, of adding about 1/3% to rates over 4 years. So that's just some broad context for your consideration.
So at the moment, if the amendment that phases 2 and 3 be removed from the LTP altogether, that wouldn't have an immediate impact on the LTP because it's been moved out
and
so
that's
far
why I wanted to bring that to your attention. You already have phases 2 and 3 delayed until FY22 and beyond. So you probably want the amendment to be considering pulling some of that work back in, such as is in front of the PowerPoint presentation.
So it's pulling this proposal forward, but that has a 0.3% impact on rates over the 4 years or each year?
No, it adds up to around about 1/3% over those 4 years.